You're sitting across from her. Her voice is soft. Her eyes lock into yours just long enough to make you feel special, but never long enough to be sure. She laughs at your jokes. Not all of them, just the right ones. And when she leans in closer, there's a part of you that forgets everything else. You feel chosen, seen, wanted. But you also feel confused, because for every moment of affection, there's a moment of distance. For every warm smile, a cold silence. You start asking yourself questions you never used to. Did I do something wrong? Is she pulling away? Why do I care this much? That's the trap. And the worst part? You think you're the one in control. What if I told you everything you believe about women, about love, about connection, has been a carefully constructed illusion? That her power isn't in her beauty, her charm, or her kindness. It's in her ability to make you doubt yourself. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us, not in romantic whispers but in brutal truths, that behind the softness we idolize lies something far more primal, a will to power. Not power in the way men often wield it, loud, direct, forceful, but quiet, emotional, psychological. The kind of power you never see coming until you're already caught. Because here's what no one tells you. The most dangerous control isn't physical, it's emotional. It's when she makes you feel like everything is your fault, like her love is a prize you haven't earned yet, like the only way to be enough is to keep chasing her approval. That's not love, that's psychological warfare dressed as romance. And yet we fall for it, over and over again. Not because we're weak, but because we were never taught the rules of the game. Nietzsche believed that man is not guided by reason, but by desire, by longing, by need, by the aching hunger to be validated. And women, whether consciously or not, have mastered that hunger. They don't dominate by force. They dominate by making you volunteer for your own submission. So here's the question. How much of your suffering in love has come from fighting a battle you didn't even know you were in? And worse, how many times have you mistaken manipulation for mystery, distance for depth, cruelty for passion? You were never taught to question her silence, her indifference, her emotional games. You were taught to pursue, to prove yourself, to win her over. But what if she never wanted to be won? What if her power comes not from what she gives you, but from what she withholds? This video isn't about hate. It's not about blame. It's about waking up. Because there are 5 psychological traps women use, not always maliciously, but instinctively, to gain control over men. And unless you see them for what they are, you'll keep confusing control with love. This is your warning, not from bitterness, but from truth. Are you ready to see what you were never supposed to notice? Let's begin with the first trap. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't insult you. She doesn't even argue. She simply pulls away. No explanation, no warning, no closure. And suddenly, you're the one asking questions. You're the one walking on eggshells. You're the one replaying every word you said, hoping to decode the silence. That's the first trap. It's not aggression, it's absence. Not confrontation, but confusion. Because silence is not empty. It's a weapon, one forged in ambiguity, sharpened by doubt, and aimed at your need for emotional certainty. Nietzsche spoke of power not as a possession, but as an expression of will. And in the quiet withdrawal of affection, women exercise that will to devastating effect. They don't need to overpower you, only to make you feel unsteady enough that you begin to chase their approval just to feel balanced again. You convince yourself you messed up, that you were too clingy, that you didn't say the right thing, but none of that matters, because the silence wasn't punishment for something you did. It was control designed to make you do more. She knows you crave closure. She knows your mind will fill in the gaps, and in that space, she gains power. The moment you begin to explain yourself without being asked, the moment you start apologizing without knowing what for, the moment you start chasing her attention again, she's already won. But here's the darker part. You don't even see it as manipulation. You see it as mystery, as depth, as the alluring complexity of the feminine mind. You romanticize the very thing that's destabilizing you. You tell yourself she's just in her head, that she needs space, that you need to be patient. But all that waiting, all that overthinking, all that emotional labor, it's not for her benefit. It's to prove you're worthy of being chosen again. This is not a conscious act of cruelty. It's often a subconscious adaptation, one refined by culture, reinforced by trial, passed from woman to woman like inherited instinct. Distance creates desire, but what it really creates is dependency. When a woman gives just enough to spark your interest, then pulls away to make you earn the next drop, you become emotionally starved. And a starving man will do anything for the promise of nourishment, even if that nourishment never comes. Nietzsche said, "Invisible threads are the strongest ties." And this is what he meant. Not handcuffs, not chains, but thoughts, doubts, longings, questions. The kind of bonds that don't restrain your body. They enslave your mind. And here's where most men fail. They mistake unpredictability for authenticity. They think emotional inconsistency means depth, that she's just complicated, that maybe if they prove themselves, if they love harder, deeper, stronger, she'll finally open up. But emotional distance isn't always the wall to climb. Sometimes it's the cage you're already in. And while you're busy trying to earn back what you never actually had, she sits quietly, in control, never having to explain, never having to justify, never having to say what she wants. Because you're already giving her everything. This is the silent cage. It doesn't rattle. It doesn't shake. It doesn't even look like a prison. But it is. And the only way out is to stop waiting for the silence to break. Because it won't. She doesn't need to say a word to have you wrapped around her emotional gravity. But once you see it, really see it, you can finally decide if you want to keep orbiting or walk away from the pull. Ready for the next trap? Because silence was just the beginning. She doesn't need to ask for your attention. She already has it. With a glance, a half smile, a moment that feels like something, but passes too quickly to hold on to. And just like that, you're hooked. Not because she gave you something, but because she gave you almost something. That's the second trap, the illusion of closeness, the seduction of the unattainable. Nietzsche understood desire not as a path to fulfillment, but as a force of suffering. The more we want, the more we are enslaved by the thing we want. And no one understands this better than a woman who knows how to be just out of reach. Because here's the twisted truth. The less she gives, the more you feel. She offers you a moment, then disappears. A kind word, then silence. A soft touch, then distance. And your brain, starved for meaning, fills in the gaps with fantasy. You build a version of her in your mind that's more intoxicating than any reality could be. She doesn't need to seduce you with her body. She seduces you with absence. And in doing so, she becomes a symbol, not a person, but a projection of everything you long for and can't have. This is where most men get lost. They don't fall in love with her. They fall in love with the idea of her, the possibility, the promise, the perfect someday that never arrives. And the longer she stays slightly out of reach, the more obsessed you become with pulling her closer. Every unanswered message becomes a mystery. Every mixed signal, a puzzle you think you need to solve. But you're not solving anything. You're spiraling. She's not confusing. She's calculating, whether consciously or not. She knows how to offer you just enough to keep you hoping, but never enough to make you whole. It's the emotional equivalent of salt water. You drink, but stay thirsty. And here's what's even more dangerous. The moment you feel like you're about to get what you want, she shifts. She withdraws. She goes cold. She says she's confused, that she needs time, that it's not you, it's her. But the result is always the same. You feel like you almost had her and lost her. And that almost is the most powerful weapon in seduction because it keeps you coming back, not for her, but for the closure you never got. And while you search for answers, for signs, for reasons, she doesn't have to do anything. You're doing all the work. You're thinking about her more than she ever thinks about you. You're trying harder than she ever will. You're emotionally investing in a fantasy she never committed to. Nietzsche warned us, the greatest lies we believe are the ones we tell ourselves. And when it comes to seduction, men lie to themselves constantly. She's just afraid of getting hurt. She's not ready yet. If I'm patient, she'll come around. But the truth, she knows exactly what she's doing. Not because she's cruel, but because she knows the power of being wanted, without being had. And you? You're addicted to the chase. You say you want her, but what you really want is to win, to conquer the impossible, to prove to yourself that you're good enough to be the exception to her silence, her distance, her emotional wall. But you won't be, because the more you chase, the more she runs. And the more she runs, the more you fall. This is the second trap. The flame you can't touch, the high you can't quit, the mirage that looks like love, but only burns you when you get close. And the worst part? You'll think it was your fault, but it never was. She wasn't just beautiful. She was different, unique, not like the others. You told your friends, she gets me. You told yourself, she's the one. You believed she was your missing piece, the woman who would complete you, heal you, save you. And that belief was the beginning of your downfall. This is the third trap, not the woman herself, but the idea of her, the goddess illusion. Nietzsche warned us, man doesn't fall in love with a woman. He falls in love with his own projection, his own fantasy. And when he does, he doesn't fall at all. He kneels. Because here's the brutal truth. The moment you idealize a woman, you give her power she didn't earn. You stop seeing her flaws. You justify the red flags. You excuse the emotional distance. And worst of all, you place your happiness, your worth, and your future in her hands. But it's not real. She's not your salvation. She's not your perfect counterpart. She's not the answer to your emptiness. She's just a person. But in your mind, she becomes sacred. And sacred things are never questioned, never doubted, never held accountable. So when she hurts you, you call it a misunderstanding. When she disrespects you, you say she was just emotional. When she withdraws, you blame yourself for not being enough. This is submission, not because she demands it, because you offer it, willingly, desperately, blindly. Nietzsche saw this as one of man's greatest psychological errors, to seek transcendence through a woman, to believe that in her lies meaning, purpose, and identity. But no one, man or woman, can carry that weight. And when she inevitably fails to live up to the image you built, you won't blame the illusion. You'll blame her, or worse, yourself. You'll spiral into shame, thinking you lost something sacred, when in truth, you lost nothing more than your grip on reality. Here's what makes this trap so devastating. It feels pure. It doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like love. It doesn't sound like control. It sounds like devotion. It doesn't feel like pain until it's too late to escape. And while you're busy glorifying her, putting her on a pedestal, writing her into your dreams, she never asked to be worshipped. But she also never stopped you, because being idolized is intoxicating. It gives her leverage. It gives her space to remain emotionally distant while still receiving your loyalty. It gives her all the power without any of the responsibility. And you become a priest at the altar of a false god, praying, waiting, sacrificing, all for something that only exists in your mind. This is the third trap, the illusion that turns love into submission, that turns devotion into dependency, that turns a woman into a myth, and a man into a ghost of himself. The tragedy: you never really loved her. You loved the story you told yourself about her, and that story became your cage. You thought it was just you and her, that your connection was something sacred, private, pure. But then there's a glance at another man, a comment about an ex, a cryptic post on social media, a shift in tone when she talks about someone else, and suddenly you're not so sure anymore. You feel something you don't want to admit, jealousy. Not because she cheated, not because she lied, but because deep down, she's playing a game you didn't know you were in. That's the fourth trap, the invisible war of emotional rivalry. See, men often think competition is loud, obvious, a battlefield of strength and dominance. But Nietzsche understood something deeper. The most dangerous battles are fought in silence. And women know this intuitively. They don't compete with fists, they compete with emotions. Not just with you, but with each other. You may see sisterhood, support, solidarity. But behind the scenes, there's a constant, subtle game of comparison, of positioning, of power. And you're not the king. You're the trophy. They won't fight for you with words. They'll do it with silence, glances, presence, absence. One day she's overly affectionate, the next distant. One day she posts a picture of you both. The next, she leaves you on red after posting a thirst trap on her story. You think it's just mood swings, but it's not. It's strategy. By keeping you uncertain, by making you aware that you're not the only option, she forces you to prove yourself, to earn your spot, to compete, even when no one said there was a game. This is where most men lose themselves. They start performing, being extra charming, more attentive, more generous, more apologetic, even when nothing's wrong. And in doing so, they surrender their power. They stop being men and start being contestants. Because when you don't know who you're really competing against, you begin to compete against yourself. You self-sabotage. You walk on eggshells. You overthink every word. You become addicted to her approval, because that's how you keep your place in the emotional hierarchy she's quietly constructed. And she never has to say a word. That's the genius of the trap. The rivalry isn't between you and another man. It's between your desire for security and her need for control. She keeps you slightly off balance, slightly afraid, slightly desperate. And the more you seek reassurance, the more power she holds. Because the one who needs the other more always loses. This is the invisible war. You think you're loving her. You're not. You're battling for her validation. Nietzsche believed that humans don't just want to love, they want to dominate, to possess, to be chosen above all others. And in the emotional battlefield women create, whether consciously or instinctively, they hold the sword of selection. You're not her equal, you're her audition. And the moment you realize that, you have a choice. Keep performing, or walk off the stage. Because you were never meant to compete for affection. You were meant to share it. But when love becomes a contest, someone always loses. And in her game, it's never her. She doesn't yell, she doesn't beg, she doesn't even demand. Instead, she sighs at the right moment, cries without explanation, smiles when you're about to walk away. And somehow you stay, even when you're exhausted, even when it hurts, even when you know you're not okay anymore. That's the fifth trap. Emotional manipulation so subtle, so tender, so perfectly timed that it feels like love, but it's not. It's control wrapped in care. It's domination disguised as need. It's chains made of softness. And they break you slowly. See, men are taught to protect, to provide, to fix. So when a woman shows pain, vulnerability, or emotional fragility, something inside you awakens. The desire to shield her, to make her happy, to be enough. And that's where the manipulation begins. Because once she knows that your emotions are tied to her emotional state, she doesn't need to argue. She just needs to feel a certain way, and you'll move heaven and earth to make it right, even when she's the one who caused the storm. Even when her silence, her withdrawal, her contradictions are the very reason you feel like you're losing your mind. But here's the cruel part. When you finally try to explain, to open up, to say what's hurting you, she turns it around. Suddenly you're the one being too sensitive. You're the one overreacting. You're the one who needs to reflect and do better. And that's when you start to doubt your own emotions. You suppress your anger. You question your pain. You minimize your needs because you've been trained to think her feelings matter more. Nietzsche called this the destruction of the individual will, the point where a man ceases to act from his own strength and instead becomes a reflection of what another wants him to be. That's what emotional manipulation does. It doesn't just confuse you, it rewires you. You stop asking, "Is this good for me?" and start asking, "What will keep her from pulling away?" You stop seeking truth and start seeking peace. Not peace in the relationship, peace from the constant emotional instability you've been placed in. But here's the twist. She may not even know she's doing it. This kind of manipulation isn't always calculated. It's often learned, absorbed, practiced unconsciously. She's learned, from experience or example, that affection can be used like a faucet, turned on when she wants more and off when she wants control. And because you crave consistency, you chase the warmth, even when you have to betray yourself to get it. That's the softest chain, the belief that this time, if you're more patient, more understanding, more loving, it'll be different. But it won't, because she doesn't need to change. You already did. And the man you became, the man who tiptoes around her moods, who lives for crumbs of affection, who questions his own worth, isn't you. It's who you became to survive her. But you're not here to survive love. You're here to build it, mutually, consciously, respectfully. And when love starts to feel like submission, like exhaustion, like walking on glass, it's not love, it's a cage. So now the illusion is shattered. The 5 traps, silence, seduction, idealization, rivalry, and emotional manipulation, weren't random. They were a system, a quiet architecture of control, not always conscious, not always cruel, but always real. And the question isn't, why did she do this? The real question is, why did you let it happen? Not out of weakness, but because no one ever taught you to see the signs, to protect your mind the way you protect your heart. You were raised to pursue, to prove, to please, but never to pause, never to question, never to walk away from what looked like love, but felt like war. Nietzsche believed true freedom begins the moment you stop lying to yourself. And maybe, just maybe, this video pulled back one more layer of the lie. So ask yourself honestly, which of these traps have you fallen into? And more importantly, are you ready to stop calling it love? Because the first step to reclaiming your power is finally seeing who's been holding the strings. If this made something click inside you, even if it hurt, subscribe, because these are the truths no one wants to say out loud, but someone has to. And drop a comment below. Which of these 5 traps hit you the hardest? Let's talk about it. You're not alone, and the awakening starts here.